Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network. Joining me as ever on our weekly film odyssey is Dallas King. Dallas, welcome back to the UK.
Buongiorno.
Yeah, so today we are going to focus on something that we have done a lot less of this year than we probably anticipated at the start of, and that's talking about film festivals. So if you follow Dallas on Twitter or any sort of social media, you'll be incredibly envious and jealous of him getting to not just leave sort of Aberdeen, but to be able to leave the UK altogether, go to Venice, and on top of that, go to the Venice Film Festival. So, you know, it's going to be quite different almost talking about this because usually any sort of discussion about a festival itself is, God, the queues were a pain in the arse this year. You know, it's I think people will equally be as interested in the films you saw as what it was like to actually go to a film festival in a foreign country, you know, let alone probably any film festival. What was that whole experience like? And I'm going to probably ask one question before we dive into that. Did you ever sort of think, you know, this has been going on for months now, did you ever actually think you were going to get to go to Venice for the film festival? And when did it become real that you were going to be there?
To be honest, no, not really. It was always, it seemed like a bit of a pipe dream, you know. It was like, I think, was it Cannes had been cancelled and, you know, Venice had sort of said it was up in the air, but I figured, you know, I had a check and looked at the dates and said, all right, well, you know, potentially I could go. I've got a lot of holidays to use because, you know, I was meant to go to Japan for 2 weeks, didn't use them. Went to Had a week booked off for Edinburgh Film Festival. It didn't happen, so I had a lot of spare time. So I figured, you know, I'll chance my hand. You know, this is, you know, one of the big film festivals, probably like part of the big three. Sort of, you know, you've got Cannes, Venice, Toronto, the ones where a lot of the Oscar films and stuff are launched. So, you know, checked, you know, put in an application, didn't really expect to hear anything back. Got in, was like great, and then it was like, oh right, okay. So booked a few days travel over there. Was flying from Edinburgh to Venice with EasyJet. That flight got cancelled, so therefore went Aberdeen to London, London to Venice. That was still fine, but I'd say it was probably not until I'd probably say maybe like 2 days before that I actually went, oh, actually, this is actually happening. I should probably A, pack, and B, actually, you know, start thinking seriously about, you know, what I'm meant to be doing there. So started sort of research the schedule, knew what films I was going to try and see, but the whole sort of, like you say, the queuing aspect and stuff is completely different over there at the moment. The festival's still going on for a few other days, but I think if, fingers crossed, it's looking like it's going to go off without a hitch, it could potentially be the template and model that physical film festivals will be adhering to in the future. Obviously, we've got several ones. Toronto's coming up. You've got New York Film Festival, which is gone entirely virtual. London is doing 95% virtual, except with a few screenings in select cinemas. I think it's probably fair to say, but I think the Venice model is probably going to be what's going to roll out over. I'd say probably the next year, at least until there's a vaccine in place. I think so.
So I know this is almost probably the silliest question to ask someone that's gone to a film festival, but I'm sure everyone will be interested to know what is an average day like at a film festival in this kind of climate.
Average day is you wake up at crack of dawn in your hotel, hopefully in time for breakfast. I was a couple of days I was too early for breakfast, so I had to just grab a coffee when I got there because if anyone doesn't know the Venice Film Festival, you've got the main city of Venice, and then you've got on one of the islands off of Venice called the Lido. That's where the entire festival takes place. So you need to get one of the water boats, a vaporetto, across in the morning. And this is something I think we can discuss sort of at the end, sort of talking about moving forward, especially in terms of London. Once I got there on the first day, picked up my press pass and stuff, you were given a card which essentially gave you free travel on one particular water taxi line from the Lido back to the centre of Venice and vice versa. And I can just imagine what the TfL would say if the BFI tried to give free tube and bus travel to all press and industry people wanting to get around the centre of London. I can see that that's just a no go to start off with. But so you get in, when you arrive, there's sort of 9 main checkpoints to get into the festival complex because it's all very well contained there. You get your temperature scanned, you get your bag checked. As soon as you're basically, I mean, even from like on public transport, you're wearing your mask, but as soon as you're in that complex, you're wearing your mask for pretty much the entire day, apart from if you're at one of the cafes or restaurants and stuff like that, or a bar, having some refreshments. No popcorn, but there was espressos, cornettos, because it's Venice, just one cornetto, you've got to have those. Um, they did paninis and sandwiches and stuff, but they also sold a lot of beer, Aperol spritzes, wine and stuff like that. But it was fairly limited in terms of like, but there was no popcorn in the screenings and stuff like that because obviously, unlike the chain cinemas that rely on concessions to survive, the festival didn't need to do that. So the biggest change in terms of going to a festival is the lack of queues. They obviously didn't want hundreds of people queuing in order to get into one particular movie to find out that they then can't. So, because I mean, one of the things is similar to London, unlike Cannes, is this is also a public festival. So you had public screenings that anyone could apply for tickets for, or you had press and industry screenings. And you would go on to the online booking section, you'd find your screening, and you put in your ticket request, and then, yep, that would be confirmed, and then you'd be going to one of those. You'd have a specific seat. It's not just a free for all. You'd have a specific seat, and every second seat was blocked off for those particular screenings because in Italy they're well on in hand and on top of tackling coronavirus, so they only have 1 meter social distancing. So it was every second seat was booked, and you were in there. And if there was lots of ushers on hand to check, I say ushers more like beefy security guys in suits, but if anyone at any point had a mask that slipped under their nose and just covered their mouth, as everyone who's walking around just now will testify, some people for some reason can't keep it over their nose, so they were down straight away, shining a torch in someone's face and basically going, "Yep, come on, mask back on." So, I mean, the entire time I was there, I felt completely safe. Obviously, hand gel, obviously hand sanitizer gel at every entrance and exit to a screen and stuff like that. So it was all very well handled. I felt completely safe the entire time, and yeah, it was a great festival. There were some pros and cons, but I think it's just purely due to the format. But I think we can discuss that in a little bit.
Yeah, so it's obviously interesting as well because so you've done red carpet like interviews and so on. What was the sort of like that kind of element of it like this year? Was that sort of just non-existent sort of press photos? Was there sort of any chance to interview people, or was it very much socially distanced? It was like that's just not happening.
Essentially, yes, that was the one of the 2 points which I was slightly disappointing, although completely understandable given the circumstances. Um, Basically, the main cinema area where the big premieres and red carpet screenings take place, the Sala Grande had basically a wall built in front of it, so basically block it from public view, so anyone to basically discourage people hanging around. So there was no fans on the red carpet. There was some press there, but a lot of it was basically like the big name press. There was no opportunities for smaller outlets, whatever, to basically go along and just like we do at the London Film Festival. We put in a request, find out if you get to go, and are then corralled into a very tight section at the end of the red carpet where some will deign you with an appearance to answer a question, or you just watch everyone getting swept into the red carpet just before the film starts. So there was none of that. There wasn't really much opportunity for sit down interviews or anything like that as well. There was a sort of press conference for each film, but that was around about 20 minutes, half an hour, very little time for questions from the audience. And again, the audiences were quite small because of social distancing in there once again. And also, it took a lot more time because most of the time the questions were being asked in Italian and English as well. So, therefore, there's much less time for questions from the press as well. So, yeah, in that respect, it was slightly disappointing, but because I didn't have time for that, I had time to watch a lot more films. But I think the other sort of disappointing, well, the only real sort of disappointing factor for me was as a Scot and a Brit abroad, there wasn't that many other Brits that I could see. I think, given this situation, I guess not many people had decided to make the journey across. I did bump into Robbie Collin from the Telegraph, so I had an espresso with him on one of the mornings. But there wasn't that social sort of aspect to the film festival, which we enjoy, sort of meeting sort of fellow critics and stuff like that that you've seen at other festivals and meeting up for drinks, social networking drinks, film networking drinks. There wasn't anything like a UK film distributor, who is putting on free Aperol or Peronis in asking people to come along and chat about films. That sort of side of the festival was completely non-existent. So it was very much a eat, sleep, watch films, repeat sort of festival for me this time around.
We always think of sort of Venice as sort of being that kind of almost just before Toronto, where there seems to be some of the kind of the bigger releases where we start to maybe have those conversations about this could be an Oscar contender here, or one of the kind of the bigger named sort of indie films. And then you also get things like, remember sort of last year there was a big push in Venice. I think it was the premiere site for something like The Joker, and then it was Ad Astra. What was sort of the lineup like this year in terms of kind of the big names? I mean, what, we're recording this just as sort of the London Film Festival has been kind of announced today, and sort of like it's a good steady kind of lineup, but none of this sort of like, oh wow, that's that big film, that's that one. What was it like for Venice? Was that very similar?
It was very similar. There was no one particular film that I was like, wow, I have to see that. There wasn't the likes of Joker or in previous years. I know they've launched like First Man, La La Land, that kind of thing. There was no big sort of Hollywood film that was like everyone was clamoring to see. Although, if they were clamoring to see that, I believe they would have, because each film had at least 5 or 6 press screenings over a couple of days. So, given the fact that everyone had to socially distance, you couldn't fill out the big cinema. So, therefore, there was more opportunities for people to see films. So, that was a bonus. But yeah, there was nothing that I was like, I have to see this. And in some ways, sometimes that's the best sort of way to find some films. I know I dragged you along to see Run at the London Film Festival last year, and you didn't really know much about it, and then you ended up loving it. So that, in that respect, something like that is good. But I think unfortunately I missed the two sort of bigger Hollywood sort of films that were coming to the festival. There was Regina King's One Night in Miami, screened the day after I left, and then one of the sort of, it must clearly be one of the big Oscar contenders, is Nomadland, which somehow is basically, quite unusually, but given this crazy year, exceptional circumstances and all, Nomadland is playing at Venice, Toronto, New York Film Festival, and London Film Festival. Normally, it would play at one of them, and they like to sort of keep things. They like to have control over one film. Say that was the film that launched at our festival, but obviously, first, given the situation, people are being a bit more lax in what they're able to screen this year. So yeah, there wasn't that big sort of Oscar contender film this year, but it was nice to be honest. It was just nice to be able to sit and watch films in a cinema screen for a couple of days.
So what were the highlights of the festival for you? What's the films that you're now desperate to talk about with people, and that you've had a chance to give a really positive review to?
I mean, sort of the top sort of five. I probably got about 5 films which I would heartily recommend. There was a couple of stinkers in there. There was a film called Mosquito State, which is set in late sort of August 2007, which was, I thought, going to be a sort of look at the upcoming sort of financial crisis in New York. It's about a Wall Street broker who's got this sort of computer program that can potentially predict things, and it looks like that. But then he's also going slightly mad and is talking to mosquitoes and stuff. It sounded really interesting, but unfortunately, the execution was just awful, and it was just a really, really bad film. There was the Greta Thunberg documentary, which is going to be on Hulu, which again had the potential to be really interesting, and there were moments when it sort of showed her as just a regular 16-year-old kid, and those were the interesting moments where you actually got to learn a bit more about her. But unfortunately, the rest of it was basically just showing us, basically, if you've ever seen her appearance at any of these conferences or something, it was just basically that. It was following her from the beginning of her uh, educational strike for climate change through to the boat trip that she made to New York to talk to the UN. It was basically her greatest hits highlight of her various media appearances, whereas I wanted it to be more about getting to know the actual girl behind, this media and climate change phenomenon. So that was a bit of a disappointment, but thankfully there were some good films to recommend. First one, which was the first film I saw, which was Mila, which is a Greek film called Apples. And this is, I described it as The Lobster Meets Eternal Sunshine and the Spotless Mind. It's by writer-director Christos Nikou, who worked with Yorgos Lanthimos on Dogtooth. And it looks like the apple does not stray far from the tree with this one. And essentially, Greece is under the uh, effect of a pandemic, not coronavirus, but of people suffering amnesia. Just their memory is completely gone, and in order to reintegrate them into society, if they're not claimed by family members, they're put into a program where they have to learn how to do certain things again, and they have to sort of write in their journal and sort of take photographs to prove that they've been doing it. So it's stuff it's riding a bike, go see a movie, and then they start to get more and more sort of complex and elaborate. Like they've got to learn how to remember how to drive a car, but then crash it, or then go dancing at a nightclub and then try and seduce someone for a one night stand and stuff. So it follows one particular man as he goes along this journey, and he meets a woman who's doing a similar sort of, she's like a couple of stages ahead in the process, and it's kind of about sort of identity and individuality. It's like if you lose your identity, who are you? But then if everyone is doing the exact same thing, are we then all the same? So it throws up a lot of interesting questions, but there's a sort of twist in the tail which really sort of packs a hefty emotional punch. This was one I gave 5 stars to when I reviewed it, and I'm happy to say that Curzon cinemas have picked this one up. No release date yet, but I expect it'll probably be towards the end of the year or early next year for that one. So I think it's perfect for Curzon, I think. Um, what else have we got? One of the big contenders potentially that could sneak into the Oscar race, depending on who picks it up and distributes it, is Pieces of a Woman. This was part of a Vanessa Kirby double hitter. She was one of the few film stars actually to attend the film festival, and she stars in. Now, this is a film which I expect will fully be described as not A24, but because it stars Shia LaBeouf as her husband, it's got Jimmy Fails from Last Batman in San Francisco, and it's got Benny Safdie from the Safdie brothers in there as well, in small roles as well. And it's about a woman who loses her child just after childbirth, and then it's about her the sort of fallout of that, how she copes with that. And it's a really sort of interesting film because the first half an hour is you with Shia and Vanessa as the couple go through this birth, and they're having a home birth, and the midwife that they have got can't make it, so they send someone else, and then something goes wrong, and then it's just a really interesting. It's all sort of handheld one take sequence, and you're fully invested in this couple and the birth. So when tragedy strikes, you're completely with her and understand what she's going through, and it's a really interesting look at sort of how someone deals with such a horrendous incident. And it's got a fantastic supporting turn from Ellen Burstyn as her mother in it as well, who has a different view of how her daughter should be coping and dealing with it. So that's a fascinating one. What else we got? One of the big hits, actually one of the few British films at the festival, which I thought was okay, but I expect it will do gangbusters with the right sort of silver screen audiences. The Duke, which is based on a real life story of Kempton Bunton, who stole the Goya's Duke of Wellington portrait from the National Gallery in 1961 and then attempted to ransom it back in exchange for money that he was going to use to pay for TV licenses for OAPs and war veterans. And it's yeah, it's like it's interesting seeing a bunch of Italians in a cinema screen in Venice, sort of chuckling away at the Geordie accent because it's set up in Newcastle, and yeah, Jim Broadbent's an absolute delight in it. He sort of steals the screen whenever he's on there. Helen Mirren is always great, as is doting and but frustrated wife, and it's got Fionn Whitehead from Dunkirk in there as his son as well, and it's just one of those sort of crowd pleasing. Uh, Sort of light-hearted comic looks at this true life story. I think I described it as Ken Loach directing the Thomas Crown affair. So that's one that will do really well. I think Jim Broadbent, depending on how the Venice thing goes, he could be in with a shout of Best Actor at Venice, and I think Vanessa Kirby, between the two films that she was in, might get Best Actress at the festival as well. And then one of the other sort of ones that I would recommend would be, it's not going to be for everyone, but I think it'll be up your street because you're a fan of Vox Lux. And this is Mainstream, which is by Gia Coppola, and it stars Maya Hawke as an aspiring filmmaker who meets a guy called Link, played by Andrew Garfield, in a shopping mall. He's playing a rat, giving it loads of cheese, but then he starts sort of shouting and berating customers for ignoring a piece of art that's on the wall and instead just going about their day. And she decides to turn him into an internet celebrity, initially to parody and take the piss out of all these influencers and that kind of thing. But then, of course, his their program gets very popular, and then he starts to buy into his own hype, and then it's about sort of like a sort of Frankenstein's monster sort of thing that she's created, and how, and he's basically one of the most obnoxious, awful characters you're going to see this year, and it's sort of like that sort of career trajectory. It sort of reminded me of Natalie Portman's character in Vox Lux, and that she is one of the worst people, but you can't help but be drawn in by the strength of her performance. And I think this one will get a UK release at some point, and I think it's not going to be for everyone. I think audiences will be very split on it. Some people found it incredibly annoying and obnoxious.
I'm I'm incredibly frustrated that one didn't get announced for London because I think as soon as the reviews started to come out of Venice, I was like, I am sold on that film. And as soon as you said you're like, I think you'll like this one, I was like, it's gonna be mainstream, and I'm so gutted that one's not thing. I would love to see Andrew Garfield delivering what I think was quoted as the most obnoxious performance of someone's career. So slightly gutted, but I'm so glad that you got to see it.
Yeah, no, it's essentially he sort of portrays himself as this almost sort of messiah of the internet. It's at one point he's coming out with like a sort of choir of and stuff like this. He's all dressed in white, like some sort of evangelical preacher telling people. That it's the weird thing is like he's telling what he's saying is the truth. It's just that the way that he does it is just so annoying, but you can't argue with anything that he really says. So it's a really interesting thing. The film is a little bit muddled and messy and doesn't quite know whether it's trying to make a complete mockery of it or be like a vicious satire. So it's a little bit muddled, but Andrew Garfield's performance is definitely one to watch, I think. So yeah. And let's see what else I wanted to recommend from there. There's a lot of oh yes, Mandibles, of course. Now this is from Quentin Dupieux, who did Rubber about 10 years ago. I saw that at the Cannes Film Festival once. So that was about a sentient killer tire. And he also did Deerskin, which was at I think it was the London Film Festival last year as well. So anyone who knows his work already knows it's very off the wall, and this is no different. This is about two friends who are going off on a criminal job, and so they steal a car, and on the way to the job they hear a noise in the boot, open it up to find a giant fly inside. They just accept the fact that there's a giant fly and decide to try and domesticate it to turn it into essentially a giant drone that they can use to try and steal stuff. So yeah, this is this was the film which probably got the biggest reaction of any crowd that I saw at the festival. It's just one of those films which starts off weird. You just have to embrace it and go with it, and it just gets even weirder. And there's what I love about it, and is the fact that it turns into a farce towards the end. the two friends basically get picked up by this group of students. One of them who believes that one of the friends is someone they used to go to school with. Spoiler, they're not. And so they're at this house and they're trying to keep the fly a secret. At one point, they think they've got a dog, and so they have to find a dog to try and do it. And what it kind of reminded me of is like some of the best sort of farce episodes. Like, I know you're a huge fan of this, the episode of Frasier when in the ski lodge, where there's loads of comings and goings and people, there's miscommunications and stuff like that. It just builds and builds and builds. And Adele Exarchopoulos from Blue is the Warmest Color, she is essentially the antagonist of the piece. She's very suspicious of these two people to begin with, and her character has, let's just say, a condition which affects her voice. And I'm not going to spoil it because when you see it, it's just like it's something that could have gone so wrong, but it just completely works within the context of the film. And yeah, I think that one will, because Deerskin did quite well in the independent. This is probably one that will certainly be in independent cinemas at some point. I think he's a cult filmmaker, but he's getting more well known in the UK now, and I think a lot of people will enjoy this. This is certainly the most crowd pleasing one which I saw there. So I think those are my top recommendations from this year's Venice Film Festival.
So it sounds like it was kind of a pretty amazing experience all in all, and I think it's just a shame that it seems to be sort of a bit of an outlier in terms of like this proper kind of out and out festival and so on. So I'm very, I think there's probably a lot of people maybe listening to this or saw your exploits and thought maybe I should have gone for it.
Yeah, I mean, I can completely understand. I'm not going to say that yes, people should have gone or shouldn't have gone. I mean, up until the time I went, I wasn't sure that I was going to go. I mean, there was still potential, depending on how, the infection rates and where that it could have got cancelled at the last minute. I mean, obviously they wouldn't have wanted to, but I think it's definitely shown that with the proper planning and the proper procedures in place, that something like this can go ahead. So it will be interesting, I think, to see how the London Film Festival goes, which is pretty much going to be all virtual apart from certain films getting a cinematic screening, a one-off cinematic screening in, well, limited locations. Let's just say only one cinema in Scotland at the moment. Hopefully, the Belmont and Filmhouse in Edinburgh are added to the list later on once they're fully back up and running. But I think I did find it ironic when they said today that the film festival is going to be more accessible than ever, well, unless you're in Scotland, of course. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how that goes in terms of having it all online, because I think one of the greatest things about the film festival is the being able to meet up with fellow film fans, fellow critics, and stuff like that, and to be able to discuss the films and stuff like that. Obviously, you could do like house parties or watch parties and get people together online in order to watch these films. But I think there's just something about, and as bizarre as it sounds, I slightly did miss the queuing at London Film Festival, as annoying as it can be and as early as you have to get up for it. Part of me really enjoys that when you have a bunch of friends and you're all just chatting away, and as long as you're near the front and you know you're going to get in, it's fine. What about yourself? Is that what you miss? I mean, what are you thinking about the
Yeah,
current?
it's one of those ones. I've got 2 weeks off work for London Film Festival, and it was one of those ones I was going to scrap the 2 weeks leave off for thinking like, well, what's the point? I can put it towards something else. But it's getting to that time of the year where it's like maybe just a 2 week break will help. And it's really positive that there's gonna be a lot of films to be able to watch kind of virtually, which I'm excited about. But I'll probably be watching them on sort of like my Apple TV, or if I can do something like that, or just a laptop. There's a few films I'm planning to make the journey through to Glasgow for that. Well, it all depends if I can get tickets, because obviously it's going to be one screen with incredibly limited capacity. My hope was that they would, just make a day of these kind of films. Have a Soul, for example, just start at lunchtime. Have 3 or 4 different screens, so they get more people into these things while being able to keep in all the sort of safe distancing, which it's not going to happen. So it's not ideal, but I'm going to try and make the most of the 2 weeks. Dive into films, watch them. Get out and about. That's kind of the plan. But I miss the social element. I think you should. It's all about those conversations, or the shared looks at the end of a great film or a terrible film, and just knowing that, right, what's next, what you have to see, what I'm off to see, it's you miss that element. It is like a working holiday, but I was glad to see that you got over, and at least you enjoyed an espresso with someone, and a yammer about films with another Scot at least.
Yeah, no, that's the thing that my wife always says when I'm at a film festival. It's like, I claim that it's work, but she says it's not work because you're enjoying what you're doing. It's a holiday, essentially. It's like, well, it is quite, people don't realize how tough it is, I say tough, I should put that in inverted commas, tough, to spend 12 hours watching films all day, knowing that you never know if it's going to be good or bad. You could go in and see a 5-star masterpiece, or you could just walk out of wounds at the London Film Festival knowing that's definitely one of the worst films that you're going to see. But then there's always that hope that there's always going to be something else that you're off to, and that could turn your day around again. And that's what it is. That's what's sort of great about the festival is getting a few films that you really want to see, but then just picking random things in the catalog and just giving them a go. So that, I think, is something that people maybe won't do as much with like the virtual online catalog. They probably won't be willing to pay to watch something random on that. I think it's going to be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how the press screenings work for the London Film Festival. And I know that the New York one, sadly, I didn't make the cut, but then that's probably my fault for sending in the application about 10 minutes before the deadline was up. And I think they just had, I think they've got like capacities on screenings and stuff like that. There's only going to be a certain number of people able to watch a virtual press screening, and also I think the press screenings are online at a very certain time, New York time. So I think there was potential that screenings were going to be like between 1 and 5 o'clock. You'd have a 4 hour window between 1 and 5 in the morning, and I was like, oh, yeah, don't think I can be bothered with that, to be honest. I like films, but there's a limit to what I'd be able to do with that. So it's going to be interesting to see if like the London Film Festival press screenings are going to be, you have to be logged in at a very specific time, or whether or not you're going to have a window to be able to watch it, whether it's 4 hours, 8 hours, 24 hours. So I know we get that information in a couple of weeks, but it's definitely going to be a different experience. But how long it goes on for? Will it be till we get a vaccine? Who knows? I know Glasgow are already talking about that they're going to adapt the film festival as um, required, but it does seem odd that the Glasgow Film Festival was the last time we were all at a festival. February seems like such a long, long time away, but I'm just kind of glad that I've got a new film festival tote bag I can carry around all day.
Yeah. So obviously you've recommended a lot of films today that people will maybe have to wait a year to see, or months to see, or have to hope that they get to a film festival. Is there anything you would recommend for this week that people maybe seek out or check out that's out there just now?
Um, I would heartily recommend uh, Charlie Kaufman's new film. I'm thinking of ending things, but with the caveat that you should not watch it on the plane back from Venice, because yeah, it's the kind of film which you really will completely fry your brain. And after 3 days of non-stop films in Venice, it's probably not the best thing to try and decompress with. I think it's a film which you need to give your full attention to. And yeah, so yeah, if you've got a enjoy it, but not straight after a film festival. What
Yeah.
about yourself?
So I've gone for, if you're looking for something, it's got quite a hearty runtime of about 2.5 hours. But I found the time to watch this documentary. It's called From Bedroom to Billions: The PlayStation Revolution. So it's one of those ones that really took me back to kind of the 90s. I was a PlayStation kid. I had a Sega Mega Drive, and then the PlayStation came along, and it just felt like it changed everything. So it's a hearty documentary that kind of covers the creation of the PlayStation, and sort of goes back to the time, sort of the technological strides, and sort of how things kind of came along with sort of the games, sort of the game providers, and so on. It was really quite interesting to sort of see how it all kind of came together. It's one I would highly recommend. It's one of those ones that's kind of available on sort of digital iTunes. You can pick up like a DVD and Blu-ray of it as well. So it was really quite fascinating to sort of see the things I never sort of considered when I was like a kid. You know, this PlayStation just appeared one Christmas and I couldn't have been happier. But the amount of effort that went into kind of creating those games that really sort of made my childhood the way it was. It was a really fantastic documentary. I say it's quite the commitment. It's sort of just short of 3 hours if you're committed to watching it. But I would highly recommend it if you're looking for a bit of a throwback to simpler game times. I know people are debating the whole cost of, I think it's the new Xbox or something like that. But for me, the PlayStation Classic will always have a place in my heart.
Yeah, no, I did have one of those and always enjoyed. I think that's when I probably got into like the Resident Evils and stuff like that. Resident Evil 2, I think, on PlayStation, stuff like that. So yeah, no, I always prefer like the older style of gaming rather than like the new ones. I brought out my SNES to play NBA Jam following The Last Dance and stuff like that. So um, yeah, it might. Who knows? Maybe it'll force me into getting one of those little mini compact PlayStations with all the retro games on it. Who knows? But yeah, no, I'll definitely give that a watch. That sounds like something I could, yeah, nice, gentler viewing time than after the Venice Film Festival. Just ease myself back into. Actually, could you ease yourself back in with the 2.5 hour film? Yeah, we'll find out.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and try not to be too jealous of Dallas's fine coffee, films, and exploits. And we'll see you all again soon. Take care.